Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the Senfer KP580. And I think this one showed up at the end of my 2020 wrap-up, and I said I would get back to it, so finally getting back to it. So I actually bought this one on CK Lewis Audio Store around 11.11, and if you look today, it's about $12.74. And the thing to note about the KP580 is the description is, it's a carbon fiber diaphragm with a magnetic Tesla circuit. So I'm not really sure what that all means, but that's what all the descriptions say. So there you go. So 10 millimeter dynamic driver with the Tesla magnetic circuit and white porcelain shell, which I think is actually just a coated metal shell. It's not all porcelain. It's not going to shatter if you happen to drop it. So that is that. So before we get into it, this was the only graph that I ran across. And first thing you notice is the bass tends to go upwards, which is pretty unusual for a frequency graph. And we'll get into it, but it definitely has a lot on that side of the graph. There's a ton of bass there. And the second thing is the upper mids are kind of up there as well. So it almost forms a literally V shape. And that's pretty much what it sounds like. So what does it look like? Sort of reminiscent of the blonde BL05S, this kind of rounded shape. It fits super well, just like the blonde BL05. Not quite the same shape, but similar. It's MMCX, and I don't have... So that's the other thing to remember about this one is... So this one, I said it was 1274. That's 1274 without the cable. So I had a cable, so I didn't buy the cable. The cable version is, I don't know what it is. It's $7 more, so it's kind of just a little more money to get a cable. But if you have a cable, use your own cable. Don't worry about the threaded MCX, which is what these guys are, these little threads right there. If you have a normal MMCX cable, it will fit just fine. So cable-wise, this is the hibiscus cable. And tips, I actually used both versions of the Starline tips. And I'll kind of explain why I went with either one of them, and you'll end up choosing your own tips or different tips. But I think the Starlines give you, they'll help out the mids just a little bit more than the open tips. But if you have a pair of Starlines, I would definitely flip one pair and try it and see which one works better on the KP580. But we'll get into that in a second. Box itself is a plain white box, and again, you can see 10 millimeter carbon dynamic driver, but they lost the Tesla circuit off of the box. So, like I said, it has a ton of sub bass extension. And it has a big upper mid, and it's a strong V shape, and it reminds me most of maybe the Urban Fun. It's got that sound that is really strong, and if you're sensitive to it, you're going to say it's shouty or it's too sharp. It's up there as far as V shapes go. This isn't a flattened, refined V shape. This is a big V with a lot of sub bass. And there's sort of an upper mid to match that sub bass, so it all feels like it's in balance, and it's not dark, which is what I was fearing that it was going to be with such a heavy bass. I thought the whole thing was going to be dark, but whatever that Tesla magnetic circuit is, there's plenty of upper mids and treble coming through. So something like London Grammar is Strong, about 18 seconds in, that song is similar to their other songs where it starts off very sparse, there's a couple of guitar notes, and then the thing rumbles like thunder coming in, and really, really nice on the KP580. A lot of those songs that you weren't expecting such a loud rumble for come through on the KP580, and London Grammar's got a few of them. And then there's like your traditional bass beat song, Madonna's Hung Up. When you hit that 45-second song, when the bass really kicks in, this thing starts really rumbling. So no problems there. It's just a matter of how much bass do you prefer, and if you like to go to that side of that much bass. But so normally it's actually quite dynamic, and when the song calls for it, it will definitely rumble. When not, it's not nearly as bad. So number 2, the mids aren't crushed. They're quite detailed. They're sharp. And for the most part, because of the staging, your mids end up slightly above the bass. The bass is usually kicking down here, and your mids are up here. There's actually quite a bit of separation, and there's not that much bleed either. So it's kind of strange. I didn't really expect the mids to be not a dryish sound. They're not really warm at all. I was sort of expecting a ton of bleed into the mids to make the whole thing sound warm and smooth, and that's not what you get. It's sort of a dryish, barely warm version of the mids, very clean, detailed, and sharp, which is why I say it kind of falls into the other side of it, where people are going to say it's going to be shouty or sharp or grainy. It goes to that side as opposed to too warm from all that bass bleeding into it. So something like Get Lucky, Daft Punk's Get Lucky, you get this huge, deep bass, and this is sort of where you look at the tips, and you're like, these open tips give you a more open sign in the mids, but the mids are a little sharper or more detailed, so you don't necessarily need this flip tip. So I ended up switching over to the regular Starline, which I was hoping would give me just a little more body in the mids, but it doesn't really push it in either direction. Either way, you end up with this really deep beat, very clear vocals, and they stay separated from that deep bass, and it's not crushing the snaps or his voice or any other things, the guitar in that song. So quite nice. And so, like, as I alluded to, there's an aggressive upper edge to this one, and some people are going to feel it as harsh or shouty or grainy. For me, I think it's just a nice aggressive edge, and coming from 2020, where everything had this kind of a more controlled bass sound, this refined, flatter V sound, this one sort of hits you in the face. It's quite aggressive, and it just lends itself to certain voices and tracks, and EDM is one of those where those sharp electronic sounds sound really great. So Dua Lipa, IDGAF, if you're familiar with that song, you probably heard it on the radio like 3,000 times. But listen really closely to that song, and her voice is right in the sweet spot of this one. Her voice has this really aggressive, clean edge to it. Her voice is kind of up there in range, and is very clean and sharp, and it's kind of right in the sweet spot of this one. And yeah, Tones and I, Dance Monkey, kind of same thing. Those higher end voices, maybe a bit nasally, but sharp. And if that kind of sound appeals to you, that detailed, sharp sound, this one is sort of in your sweet spot. And then on the other side, you get Sam Smith, another one. His voice sounds a little sharper and a little higher than Warm. Too Good for Goodbye, same thing. It just lacks that warmth that you would get from, say, an EDX or some other dynamic driver, warmer sound. It's not that. And so I like Sam Smith a lot. I wasn't super happy about his voice on this one, but again, you sort of have the choice of tips will get you a little more warmth, maybe a dampening material, foam, alcohol pad. There's a guy on Head-Fi who's the one who originally kind of turned me on to this one, Sub 30. He went with the alcohol pad. I know I saw Slater talking about foam as well. So I didn't really use either of those, and that's why I kind of left number 3 in there, just to let people know. But with some dampening material, that will, I think, alleviate some of that problem, if that's a problem for you. So number 4, newer recordings and females are better. I think that's just generally what this one hit me as. Some of the older things, there was just more of a recessed male voice to it. Females, always closer, more intimate, very detailed, very big, just the way it kind of works out. I mean, it's a V shape, so it's not all that shocking, but for the most part, especially newer vocals, and even Sam Smith, those vocals are just very much big and intimate and close, and not really recessed at all. So sound-wise, we'll kind of repeat some of what I already talked about, but let's walk through it anyway. So the bass, dynamic, strong, but still controlled. And even though that graph is a little scary, and I'm telling you that the sub bass is, it goes all the way down to 20 hertz. If you want to run your sine wave sweep on it and listen to 20 hertz, it's there. There shouldn't be any problem hearing it. I could hear it. I'm probably older than you. So plenty of 20 hertz, plenty of bass, but it's not crushing bass. There's almost that firewall between the bass and the mids. There's not a whole lot of bleed there, and I almost wish there was a little more bleed. And I will say that, whether you use an alcohol pad or foam, it would probably give you, bring that level of the mids down a little bit so it sounds with a little more body as opposed to higher and shouty. But it's really on the edge for me. I don't think it's shouty or grainy, but that was coming off some warmer sets, so maybe I'm a little tainted from what I've been listening to. But it kind of struck me as more urban fun than anything else. So the mids, like I said, just not as warm as I expected them to be with all that bass. And there's just this nice edge for sharper sounds on higher voices, on instruments, on guitars and snare drums. All that nice upper end to notes, all that is there, and it's sharp and it's detailed and clean because there's not a whole lot of bass bleed. But if it bothers you, then definitely go with this foam or alcohol pad. And so I was just reading it up on this morning, and I think Slater said there was, if you pop off the grill, there's actually plenty of room down there for some foam. As I said, sub 30 used an alcohol pad. I didn't use either one of them because it doesn't really bother me all that much. And then try tips or cables. I think it's one of those that's just right on the edge that you can push it either way with tips or a cable. So the treble, extended, boosted, and for me, that's like the weirdest, maybe non-cohesive part of the whole signature are the cymbals. Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, that cymbal hit right in the beginning sounds really brassy. Almost like, and I would say brassy is sort of like there's a more high end to that cymbal as opposed to the low end of the cymbal, which is what you normally get. There's usually a really quick upper end to that cymbal, and then there's a more body lower end to it. And on this one, it just sounds, you get a lot of the high end, and it's just more brassy. Linkin Park Bleed It Out about 154. I think you get the same effect, and it just pops out at me. I wouldn't call it a deal breaker by any means, but I think it's more noticeable with cymbals than anything else, because like Linkin Park's Bleed It Out, that guitar sounds really fine. Like I didn't think that it was, the electric guitars sounded off all that much, but the cymbal, and I'm sure people with a Senfer, they're going to say some natural instruments don't sound as natural as they should, and in this case, they're going to lean brighter than darker as they did on a DT6. So maybe they'll come out with a KP580. I know there's a KP580 version too. I'm kind of surprised. I'm kind of also curious to see how it actually affected that specific little bit, because that's what they did with the DT6 Pro, was it seemed like they took a bunch of feedback from the DT6 and made it more balanced and more natural sounding. So maybe the version 2 is slightly different. Don't really know. So staging on this one, it's just natural wide. It's not super wide, but there's just plenty of space between the height on the vocals and the bass, and then going beyond your ears. The vocals are really big, a big vocal image right in the middle. Quite nice, really nice. And I don't really have any complaints there. I think they pulled that one off better than the DT6 and the DT6 Pro. With that little height, all that space around the vocals, and then pushing out some of the instruments even beyond your ears, I think is about as wide as they needed to go to get everything in there. So it's not, I think the CS16, probably wider, but some people are going to call it unnaturally wide because it's really wide. This guy is kind of a more natural wide, but that's it. So that is my take on the KP580. I do like this one a lot. I don't know if it'd probably replace the DT6 because I like the DT6 Pro more than I like the DT6. If anyone asks me about the DT6, I usually mention the Pro more than the actual DT6. But these are just different. Having all that bass and then these cleaner mids and then that strong upper midsection. It's not quite the way the DT6 Pro was, so I wouldn't call it a replacement. It's just another set in their portfolio, but wouldn't call it an upgrade or a downgrade or a side grade from either one of them. It's definitely a different signature. Still V-shape, but definitely different. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.